Living in an ableist world, autistics learn that if they want to be accepted, they have to mask their true selves. But over time, masking damages our self-worth, and it may also lead to internalized ableism. Ableism is embedded in the very structures of our society. Accommodations for people with disabilities sometimes happen, but usually these are the exception to the rule. Some people with autism don't present as having a disability, and can even come across as highly intelligent and capable. Neurotypicals in these cases are even less likely to make such accommodations. They may also attribute autistic difference to other causes. For example, autistics who fail to follow certain social rules may be labeled selfish and rude. Neurotypicals may then criticize, judge, punish, and exclude them. The issue here is not merely that neurotypicals are intolerant of autistic differences. It's that people in general operate from a baseline ableist assumption. Most are oblivious to the extent to which this ableism informs their thinking. This obliviousness then leads to microaggressions. Microaggressions are the commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. This starts as early as the school playground, with kids slapping all kinds of hurtful names upon their neurodiverse peers. It can also happen within our own families of origin. I remember my own parents calling me antisocial for being a bookish introvert. In school, I had teachers tell me that I lacked common sense and that I had poor handwriting. Turns out, all of these traits were a part of me being autistic. But even having a diagnosis doesn't guarantee protection. One time, I had a friend suddenly touch me from behind. When I reacted with shock and explained my reasons, my friend responded by cussing out my Asperger's syndrome. Misunderstandings like these are compounded by issues related to the skill called theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to recognize and understand thoughts, beliefs, desires, and intentions of other people in order to make sense of their behavior and predict what they are going to do next. Autistics typically have impaired theory of mind. However, I've noticed that our differences can sometimes have the same effect on neurotypicals. Why? Because neurotypicals again operate from an ableist perspective. This makes them more likely to misunderstand and misjudge our reasons and motivations. When I got into trouble as a child, I would usually be upfront with the truth, believing that my confession would be taken at face value. But protesting my innocence or admitting to having been naive would rarely win me favors. One time, someone even suggested that I was stupid for expecting them to believe my story. Even with the full knowledge of a diagnosis, neurotypicals may continue to mistake an autistic's intentions. To give another example, one time my mother told me she was going to make some pasta sauce for me. She explained that she was going to fetch a can of tomatoes from storage, indicating what I took to be the size of the can. I thought she indeed meant to fetch a can of this size. And because of my impaired theory of mind, I interpreted her gesture literally. When I expressed my confusion over why she wanted to use such a big can, my parents believed I was being a smart aleck. This tendency to not adjust expectations when dealing with someone autistic can sometimes be the result of what clinicians call disguised presentation. That is, autistics may present themselves as not having a disability or being more capable than they actually are. In some cases, this is deliberate. The autistic is trying to mask their disability for fear of intolerance and rejection. Like neurotypicals, autistics want above all to be accepted for their authentic selves. But when autistic authenticity collides with ableist expectations, disaster can result. Due to our impaired theory of mind, it can be hard to understand others and to anticipate how they might react to our actions. So we become master imitators and concealers. We mask, knowing that by hiding our neurodiversity, we are protecting ourselves in an often hostile and perplexing world. Sometimes these compensations can be positive, and sometimes they're not. A positive example is overcoming noise sensitivity by wearing headphones whenever one is out in public. A negative example is avoiding talking about one's interests for fear of misreading social cues and rambling. But telling yourself that you need to change to fit neurotypical expectations is a form of internalized ableism. Ignoring your own needs and hiding your differences is usually self-defeating. For instance, I once had a friend who would regularly invite me to the movies. Personally, I find sitting in a movie theater to be sensory torture, with people constantly rustling bags and crunching on popcorn. So rather than explaining this to my friend, I went along with her invitations, usually at great discomfort to myself. Eventually, I had to start making excuses for not wanting to join my friend, and she came to believe that I was intentionally avoiding her. Another issue I've struggled with in the past was executive function, specifically self-organization, managing time, and staying on track. I had a manager who once unloaded on me over this, accusing me of being self-absorbed and irresponsible. Rather than reacting defensively, I admitted my mistakes and I asked the manager if she could advise me on how I could improve. She replied by telling me that my request was beyond the scope of her role. It was one thing to turn professional feedback into a personal attack, but to then refuse to support me was quite another. This is, unfortunately, a common experience for autistics. Often we're told that we've done wrong, but without being told how to course correct. Until my diagnosis with autism, I didn't have a framework by which to defend my difference. I could have spoken up about my issues and tried to negotiate accommodations. What stopped me, however, was the belief that I was somehow choosing to be difficult. Having internalized ableism, I'd come to feel inferior, even ashamed for my difference. My self-esteem in this sense had become conditional upon the approval of others. So I became a workaholic, constantly vying to prove my worth to others. I also struggled to maintain healthy boundaries, believing somehow that I was always responsible when something went wrong. Such was my shame that even after my diagnosis, I shied from the company of other autistics. I convinced myself that the people who frequented autism-related groups weren't like me, that I was somehow more high-functioning. What I feared but dared not acknowledge was that to be in their company might make me one of them. Ableism had created such a stigma in my mind, and despite everything I now knew, I still believed my autism to be a kind of flaw or personal shortcoming. Ableism is clearly oppressive. It demands that we abandon our autistic identities and disregard our needs. But we can begin to counter its presence in our lives with authenticity. Authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. One way to do this is by indeed seeking out fellow autistics around whom we can be our authentic selves. Having a community like this helps normalize our experiences, and it combats the stigma that can make having a disability such an isolating experience. How does ableism show up in your life? Do you recognize any of the forms of internalized ableism I've described here? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you found this video helpful, give me a thumbs up, hit the notification bell, and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.